Hello and welcome to the Peace Talk, this time with Professor Heikki Patomäki. Heikki Patomäki is a social scientist, activist and professor of world politics at the University of Helsinki. Previously, Heikki has worked as a professor at the University of Nottingham-Trent and other universities around the globe. He is a founding member of the new Helsinki Center for Global Political Economy that was established in April 2020. Furthermore, he is the vice president of the EuroMemo Network. Among others, he published a book on the future of world politics, on the Ukraine war, and many other books on global political economy. Dear Heikki, I'm very glad and honored that you followed my invitation and that you're willing to appear a second time on this broadcast.
Thank you very much.
Today, we are going to discuss the recent alarming developments in Germany in regard to the crisis in the Middle East and the atrocities that are happening there. And also, I would like to discuss with you how it could or how it influence the academic world also. Let me begin with by reading what the EuroMemo Group has published, and then let's comment it together. So the EuroMemo Group statement with the title "German Decisions in Sharp Violation of the Basic Principles of the European Union." It was published, I believe, a few weeks ago or months ago. Yeah. And it stated like this: alarming developments with respect to shutting down a Palestinian Congress by Berlin authorities and the ban on Yanis Varoufakis' entry to Germany. We, the EuroMemo Group, feel compelled to speak out against Germany's recent decision to deny the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis' entry to the country. On April the 12th, Germany's Interior Ministry prevented Yanis Varoufakis' participation in the Palestine Congress, a conference in Berlin alongside the British-Palestinian surgeon Ghassan Abu Sitta, Rector of the University of Glasgow, and the Palestinian researcher Salman Abu Sitta. The German authorities also banned Varoufakis' political activities in Germany. These German decisions are in sharp violation of the basic principles of the European Union, including the freedom of movement, the freedom of thought, the freedom of speech and the freedom of assembly. Because there was no legal basis for the ban, these decisions to deny basic rights to an EU citizen violate also the rule of law. We express our concern about the state of European democracy and the rule of law and urge the Euro bodies to tackle the issue immediately and decisively. So, dear Heikki, let's comment it. What was the motivation to publish such a statement? And maybe you can also bring your school of thought, the critical realism, into play, how to assess these developments.
Well, I mean, the concern there was, of course, that this cancel culture is now spreading into Europe as well. And in the case of Gaza conflict in particular, I mean, there seems to be, and especially so in the German-speaking world, there seems to be a very strong tendency to deny the basic rights related to the freedom of speech. So it is almost impossible to criticize the Israeli state, and also the all these violations of international law and other things, atrocities that are happening in Gaza at the moment. Also, there's the high risk of escalation of this conflict to something much more serious. And even that seems to be something that can't be openly discussed. The cancel culture is, of course, not only something specific to the German-speaking part of Europe. I mean, we have seen similar developments also in the UK and in other parts of Europe as well. But it is particularly strong in the German-speaking part. Obviously, the EuroMemo Group the aim of the group is to reform, to improve, to transform the European Union into something that is both democratically more legitimate and economically and politically more viable than the current European Union. Obviously, our point of criticism is also related to the intra-EU discussions about the direction we are going to take. And unfortunately, it seems to me that the European Union is heading towards more disciplinary and militarized direction. And this cancel culture is very much part of it as well. So this is the main concern. These are the things that we are thinking about when we wanted to make a statement about the canceling of Varoufakis' entry to Germany.
I understand, and the topic is very crucial also for the academic world, because the space, the shrinking space of what we can say and what we can publish is also very important for knowledge, for seeking the truth and whatsoever. So it is important, yes. The link on the EuroMemo statement one can find in the YouTube info box, so one can read it. It is put in the info box. So allow me to read a small part of a great analysis by the peace researcher Dr. Yanis Grimm. And I believe he explains the German dilemma with the so-called Staatsräson, raison d'etat, very good in my opinion. He wrote, on one hand, the siege of Gaza and genocide accusation against Israel by the state of South Africa and various scholars of genocide have put the need for regional and historical conflict expertise as guidance for German foreign policy decisions into sharp relief. On the other hand, selective empathy, symptoms of moral panic, and a violent discourse marked by the disciplining of critical voices and a wrangling over terminology to describe the suffering inflicted on civilians have hindered scholars in the ability to provide much needed context and analytical depth to a highly emotionalized and polarized public debate. So, in my opinion, it is well put by the German peace researcher Dr. Yanis Grimm. And also, one can find the whole article in the link below in the YouTube info box. So, what's your opinion on that?
I tend to agree, of course. The problem is that, I mean, when society becomes polarized and political opinions become polarized, you don't anymore feel for the others that there's a distinction between us who are part of humanity and the others who are less so. And this is of course the source of all violence, not in the sense that this is the causal the origin of all violence, but it is necessary for the legitimization of violence. And I think that kind of a move is always very dangerous, particularly when it is mutual and the conflict escalates and there's a tendency for increased violence in that kind of a context. So I think one of the main tasks of peace research is to overcome, to deconstruct those kinds of dichotomies and try to see the world in a more nuanced and contextual ways, and also in terms of recognizing the common humanity in all of us.
Absolutely, and I observed many scholars that are also criticizing this tendency. For example, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, Slavoj Žižek, one of the most famous philosophers of our times, stated that we have a so-called ban on theory. So what he's referring is, like also Grimm said, that the spaces of explanation and theory is shortening, because one can easily, put at the same level explanation and legitimization. So to explain something is not the same as legitimizing it, and many people are confusing it, and that's why, for example, Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greek, and also I believe a professor of economics, a great scholar, great philosopher also, had many, of course, controversial standings and maybe sharp terminology. But is this the reason to ban him, or is it better to open up the debate and let's have a debate? Is it a genocide? Is it ethnic cleansing? Is it just a violation of humanitarian law, which is bad enough? So this is maybe the problem that we are facing today.
Well, as far as Varoufakis is concerned, I think that the underlying interest in his activities is with peace rather than with encouraging anybody to commit acts of violence in any sense of the term. And I think this distinction is very important. I mean, of course, if you start to criticize the others in a manner that encourages also violence, then we have crossed the line. But in the case of Varoufakis, that is clearly not the case, and we will need to open the public space for different opinions. And in this case, it is also clear to me that like in most conflicts, I mean, there are many things we can criticize of the actors on both sides. And obviously, Hamas committed atrocities when they attacked Israel a bit more than a year ago. What has happened since then, it might or might not be a genocide, but obviously it is against international law in many ways and against also our common morality as well, that you are destroying a lot of civilians in an act of war and destroying the entire Gaza Strip in many ways. It was, in political economy terms, if you look at the situation in Gaza before the Hamas attack in Israel, I mean, it was one of the worst places on planet in terms of the rates of unemployment, the poverty rates, and the infrastructure, and the hospitals lacking medication, and all kinds of other things. So, however strongly we want to condemn acts of violence, we also can understand the reasons for those kinds of decisions and attempts to appeal to the international community that something has to be done to the position of the Palestinians, and that this conflict has to be resolved by means other than violence. And that kind of a criticism is something that in my view, anyone with critical reason is of course not only entitled to, but there are very strong reasons to actually take part in critical discussions about the situation and how that can be resolved. And it is very hard for me to see how that kind of a critical discussion can happen unless there's freedom of speech.
Absolutely, especially from a left or critical perspective. It's a dangerous, atmosphere to live in, also in academia, if we are not allowed to think freely and discuss many things. And maybe we are wrong, but to have a discussion is the first step. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to come to the violation of international law and so on and so forth a little bit later. I wanted to mention that Yanis Varoufakis also was banned, not banned, but his lecture was cancelled by the university. So also in Vienna it happened to him. And the most funny fact was that he wanted to present his latest book on capitalism. So it has to do with philosophy, political economy, and has nothing to do with the situation in the Middle East or with Gaza or with Israel. So it's a funny story that he is not allowed to present his book in Vienna. So it's unfortunate, just because of his then recent statements on Palestine. And one, of course, can criticize him for saying, okay, it's a genocide. Maybe it's up for debate. Maybe we should wait a little bit longer. Then I saw a paper which was asking also the right questions. Should we wait for, okay, let's wait until 100,000 people are dead, or should we wait for 200,000, or what is the point of waiting, and shouldn't we take action? But that's maybe another point. And I also wanted to mention that not only Yanis Varoufakis is the victim, but also many scholars. I deserved it in my personal field. From the critical peace studies, we have monthly meetings and gatherings, and there we exchange thoughts and of course privately, and I don't want to name their names, But yeah, they are objecting that they are afraid of speaking up, and they are afraid of writing critical papers, and they are, you know, better to be silenced in this moment, which is also unfortunate. If left-wing and critical voices are not heard, it's not good for democracy, I believe. And also Yanis Grimm said that since the vicious campaign against Muriel Asseburg, one of Germany's most distinguished Middle East experts, in early 2023, many researchers have refrained from speaking publicly about Israel-Palestine. The demarcation of limits for acceptable critique on the siege of Gaza, including the influential public intellectuals, have only reinforced this trend. And not only German intellectuals, and this is here, I want to make a strong point here. Jewish critical voices that were silenced, cancelled, or simply ignored are, among others, and there are many, Deborah Feldman, Candice Bryce, Tomer Doughton Dreyfus, and many, many others. And I want to read maybe the Jewish writer Tomer Doughton Dreyfus, who wrote the following. Germany has become a dangerous place for us. Even if it doesn't feel like it already, we feel it, we, the Jews. We have the sixth sense that alarms us when Germany becomes dangerous for us. The fight against anti-Semitism is constantly weaponized and instrumentalized in order to push a far-right agenda and policies into the mainstream. And here is a very important point. Jews make up 1% of the population, but 30% of cancellation of events due to suspected anti-Semitism, because it's not about us, it's protecting us. It's about protecting a fellow nationalist nation state. We are played by the hegemony against other minorities, bearing the message that we are the reason they cannot mourn their death. When we voice our objection to this cynical move, we get silenced. So the victims are also Jews, and this is also important to mention that, yeah, we have this Staatsräson in Germany is it's ambivalent, to say it mildly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, identities are ideologies. I mean, whether your real identity is being a Jew or not, I mean, doesn't really matter. It's a matter of whether you confess to a certain particular ways of thinking about your identity. It's a normative notion. I mean, the accusation that there's a genocide going on is, of course, very strong. And as I said, I mean, we can either agree or not agree that there's a genocide going on in Gaza. I tend to think that it's not a genocide. But we can't have a meaningful and reasonable discussion about whether there's a genocide going on unless we also give the freedom to make that the case that there is actually a genocide going on. So we have to listen to the others who might not share our assessment of the situation. I think that all kinds of wrongdoings can be committed quite independently of whether there's a genocide going on or not. And this discussion is only part of the normative moral discourse about wrongdoings in a conflict. We also have to bear in mind that, I mean, I don't think that there is any war where the wrongdoings are only on one side. And this is also a part of the problem of war. War is hell, like Michael Walzer said in one of his books, Just and Unjust Wars, that no matter whether we consider war just or not, it's still hell. And very often it implies all kinds of atrocities, very difficult to justify morally. There's also a very strong tendency to think that when the other side has committed some atrocities, that justifies our atrocities to them, which is of course wrong. Two wrongs don't make a right, obviously. And the problem is rather to overcome the conflict, and for this to happen, it is absolutely necessary to have some kind of a dialogue about the basics of the conflict. And this also includes discussions and debates in the global public sphere as well, in different parts of the world. When we are discussing the conflict in Israel, Palestine, we need to be able and be open to arguments that are coming from different directions. As I said, I think the borderline between what is acceptable and what is not acceptable is whether you preach violence or not. I mean, everything else has to be accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should protect, of course, both sides and of course, the people on the ground. That is absolutely necessary. But on the other hand, we need to, look at the facts and discuss some terminology and also, the context. This is important. Let me brief, because you mentioned the violation of international law. There are many, for example, UN representatives that were stating that, over 130 UN workers have been killed, that the occupied West Bank, for example, and other parts are illegal under international law. Other UN representatives have criticized Israel's action in Gaza for example, being indiscriminate. Now we are seeing in the northern Gaza the settlements, which is also, one can say, ethnic cleansing or the beginning of an ethnic cleansing. I believe in the 60s or 70s, Israel was accused of apartheid, and it was also a resolution. Then they turned it down. But this is also, South Africa made the case for, okay, we know what is, I believe in the UN General Assembly, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that we South Africans know what apartheid looks like, and they, said that it's continuation of more than half a century of apartheid. So it's a strong accusation, but they made a point. For example, the killing of our Iranian national inside Syrian embassy clearly violates international law, particularly the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations from 1961. For example, this international treaty governs the conduct of diplomacy between nations and protect the inviolability of diplomatic missions, including embassies and so on. So the list goes on and on and on. And for example, the pager attacks, many international scholars are now divided, and they say, okay, we need to add more information. Who was killed and was it indiscriminated? And so on and so forth. But, there is also a good, from the US State Department, a good report from 2020, which reports on the human rights practices in Israel. So it's not, up for debate. I believe this is objective data. So we need to tackle this, and we need to address these issues, but in the same time protect, Jewish life and protect everybody, and minorities, ethnic groups, and so on and so forth. So I believe this is a key balance, not to fall in the trap of hatred or radicalism or right-wing extremism. So this is, I believe, a key part of critical intellectuals.
Yeah, I totally agree that in balanced judgment, there are many things that the Israeli state has done to violate international law. But of course, in any single instance, we can debate whether there has been this violation or that violation, and whether the circumstances actually somehow justify that particular course of action. The problem in international law is that we don't have any supreme authority to decide what the international law actually is. So it is left to the parties, let's say, in this kind of a conflict, to make claims about what is against international law, what international law determines in this case, and so on. And for that reason, I've been thinking that there should be some kind of a body on a global scale that is legitimate and can actually determine what the international law is. How should we interpret it? How should we apply it in this particular case? And the best option, in my view, would be something like a world parliament, that we would have an elected body on a global scale that doesn't necessarily make laws as much as interpret what the law is. And that could speak in the name and on behalf of the world community as a whole. And we are lacking something like that at the moment. There's no way of appealing. If there's a particular interpretation of law, can we appeal to anyone? We can't, because the system is very decentralized. Decentralization can be good for some purposes, but here we have a major problem. I mean, what actually is international law? And the problem is that when there's a conflict and different parties start to apply or interpret international law in a contradictory way, then it becomes very easily a Hobbesian world where only might matters and nothing else. And at worst, this becomes might based on military means, meaning basically violence at the end. So we would need to strengthen the world community in that way, and design and also realize systems and procedures whereby we can actually say something much more determinate than is actually the case at the moment about what the law is and what law requires.
Absolutely. Let me address two more things, and then maybe I come to my last question. Also in the YouTube info box I linked because it's important, and I love the show from Democracy Now! It's a great show, and it's about 2 million viewers, subscribers, and it's a great show. And Yanis Varoufakis was on there, and he told his story. So it's also in the YouTube info box. And then also a lecture from Emilia Roig. She's a Jewish intellectual, and she with the title "Is Anti-Zionism Anti-Semitic?" Because this is in the public debate and also in the academic debate in Austria and in Germany narrow, and we have a definition of anti-Semitism which includes the critique of Israel and which include anti-Zionism. So if you're anti-Zionist, then automatically you are anti-Semitic. And she discussed it from her perspective, and she's talking about the weaponization of anti-Semitism in the current debate. So it's in the Free University of Berlin. And also in Der Freitag, I believe, she published, or she was cited there, I'm not sure, a paper where she said that it's nowadays she feels that Germany decides who is a good Jew and who is a bad Jew. And this is very anti-Semitic, and this is the key problem. Because the good Jews, apply to Staatsräson, apply to the policies that Netanyahu made, and the bad Jew, the left wing and the anarchists, and so on and so forth. So, I recommend the article and I recommend the lecture from Emilia Roig. It's also in the YouTube info box. And my last comment, I want to highlight also the Jewish artist Candice Bryce. The director of the Saarland Museum in Saarbrücken in Germany cancelled her, show or work in the museum because she has some statements on her social media about Gaza. At the end of the October, she wrote that it was possible to support the Palestinian struggle for basic rights and human dignity, including liberation from the decades of oppression, while unequivocally condemning the horrific carnage exacted on October the 7th and cruel stranglehold that Hamas exerts on Gazan civilians. So at the same time, criticize both sides. And the Saarland Museum cancelled Candice Bryce exhibition. Later, the director stepped down, and the statements, it was not clear by which law or by which policy they cancelled her. So yeah, this is very difficult but I wanted to highlight this very courageous and strong Jewish voices. Other example was the Social Democrat politician. She posted on social media, she reposted a post from Jewish Voices for Peace, and she was criticized for it, and there is no place for anti-Semitism in German politics, and she was criticized for that. So yeah, horrific scenes and the yeah. But okay, without any further ado, I want to come to my last question. Maybe you have some insights, or maybe you have some ideas. How can we solve the issue? In this academic world, how can we debate, without polarization and emotionalized, debates? Because these things are normative, and seeing dead bodies is of course emotionalizing, and it's not easy to not take a side and to be objective. What can be a solution in the academic world? And maybe the second part is even more ambitious. Maybe take a whole lecture to answer it, but how can we resolve the Gaza conflict and the Middle East conflict? And what is coming from the critical realism school, what can be a proper solution for world politics in this tensioned times?
Well, I think that the world of science and the world of scholarship is cosmopolitan by its very nature. And it is one aspect of cosmopolitanism that you can criticize your own identity as well. I mean, however you identify yourself, of course, you have layers of identities, but I mean, let's say that we are talking about a particular national identity. I mean, in the case of Germany, for instance, or Austria, obviously there are historical layers that everybody recognizes as worth criticizing. In the case of Jews, that is less the case. But I mean, just think about a country like Finland. I mean, it took part in the Operation Barbarossa in the Second World War, in the siege of Leningrad, and there were concentration camps in the Eastern Karelia and other places as well. We need to understand and know that, I mean, whatever your identity is, however good the identity is supposed to be in a particular context, I mean, there are always something very much worth criticizing in that identity as well. So that kind of a self-criticism is part of it. Of course, I mean, there's also the more constructive aspect as well, that we are contributing to something that is in common. And the idea that the universities can start to cancel or the rights of some people to actually speak within the community of science and scholarship goes against the very idea of science belonging to the whole humanity. It's a universalizing thing that the knowledge and truth knows no borders and all the rest of it. So I think the attempt to somehow compartmentalize and fragment science in terms of different identities and political divisions goes against the very idea of science and university. To actually make universities to live up to this ideal, we would need to have some kind of a new global system of what I call meta-governance as well, to create that kind of a basis for universities across the world. The neoliberalization of the universities, I think, and the commercialization, commodification of the universities have paved way for this kind of an identity politics as well. And I think it is very detrimental to the very idea of university. As a critical realist, of course, I mean, I combine ontological realism about the world, epistemological relativism, and the possibility of rational judgments. And the idea of epistemological relativism lies precisely in the idea that all our knowledge is always fallible. The things can be seen from different perspectives. So everything that we claim in science is always transient. We find better ways of thinking about the world. And it is a very Republican dialogical enterprise from the start to the end. I mean, the only way we can have a science and a scholarship that can actually progress in some way is to be as open as possible to the good arguments and dialogue. And so this is my answer in a nutshell, that the cosmopolitan institution of the university requires open dialogue.
And to my second part of the question, the more broader one, how can we resolve the, Gaza crisis or Middle East crisis? Because now we are heading towards, escalation. Iran is, announcing big moves. Also Israel. We are waiting for the retaliation from Israel against Iran. So, maybe we are. Yeah, it's there are dangerous times. So how can we resolve this crisis? You named earlier. You stated about the UN, maybe as a world government, and maybe if we democratize it and bring up, for example, African nations stronger in the debate. Maybe this is one part of the answer. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is a truly complex question. I mean, there are so many elements and layers there. I don't want to write a blueprint for resolving the conflict of Palestine. I think there are a number of possible solutions, but of course, they all require at some level dialogue. I mean, in that sense, I mean, the two answers are combined because without the dialogue, there can be no resolution of the conflict. There's the two-state solution, there's the one-state solution. I mean, these are both possible. I think perhaps more realistic at the moment is still the two-state solution, but it might be in the long run better to have just one state and all these people living there as equal citizens with the same rights and obligations. So that might be better. But of course, I mean, if you think about the short term, I think a lot hinges upon what the United States does, because the Israeli state is so dependent on the US, and without the support of the US, they couldn't continue this line of action that they are now taking. So that's a key consideration. For the Europeans, if you ask what can we do, it depends on who we are, actually. As Europeans, I would say that the current stance of the EU, including also the German-speaking world that is somehow lies at the very center of this, and Germany has been hegemonic in the European Union in many ways, and so on and so forth. I mean, the problem is that the European Union used to be more balanced in their judgments and in their activities toward Palestinians and Israelis. And nowadays they become more Americanized in the way they actually approach this conflict. And I think this is a major problem. So this is also something that is dependent on European politics as well. And the cancel culture discussion that we had earlier is very much related to this one, because without this kind of an open dialogue, we can't have balanced views coming from Europe. And it would be extremely important that the EU took a more supportive line toward improving the situation of the Palestinians, starting with their socioeconomic situation, immediate help and relief, and attempt to create some kind of a peaceful solution to the current crisis, but then also moving toward actually recognizing the equality of Palestinian people in that region, whether we are talking about the two-state solution, one-state solution, or whatever, doesn't matter as much as the direction of the process.
Absolutely. I thank you very much for being courageous, for being critical as always, and I thank you very much for your insights and for the time. I enjoyed the talk and I learned a lot from your articles and books, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you.